Peter, thanks again for coming here. Who are your typical clients and what are they looking for?
First of all, thank you, Mark. My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I mean, my typical client is an insulator of wiring cable. Some copper conductor people or things closely related, assembly companies, interconnect, some suppliers to the industry. But typically, people are looking for competitive expertise or marketplace knowledge. Mostly mid-senior level sales and marketing, manufacturing, engineering, general management. You know, there's always needs for individual contributor engineers, you know, but that's more of if I know one is available, it's easier for me to make, 10 phone calls and we'll get a couple of interviews because that's in such demand. But my bread and butter, like I said, is medium, senior level manufacturing, engineering, sales. Companies call us because we've been doing this so long. Most of our business is repeat business.
What should companies consider and include in their search process to give them the best likelihood of making a good hire?
You want to draw from the largest audience possible. There's like basic categories. You'll get the people who are unhappy and actively on the job market, the unemployed who are actively on the job market. But then the third category is someone who's, gainfully employed. Now, you're only going to get them into your pool of candidates if someone goes out and recruits them. Someone in my position, maybe an internal recruiter, but somebody's going to have to do that because they're not out there, answering ads or looking on job boards. The advantage I think I have is that these gainfully employed people, I talk to them all the time, and a lot of them, they're happy, but, they kind of got a wish list. The plant manager that wants to be the VP of manufacturing, the national sales manager who wants to be the VP of sales, or maybe it's a certain geography. Hey, if there's a job in, the Carolinas doing this, call me. Or maybe they're attracted to a certain company because certain companies in the industry attract people more than others. So it's really those three categories you want to draw from. Jobs get filled every day by the first two, running ads, whatever. And you can find a perfectly fine candidate. But if you want to, draw the largest pool possible, you got to do all three.
Okay. Before you present a potential candidate to your client, what are some of the criteria you consider?
Besides basically fitting, the job requirements, you have to be a ready, willing, and able person to make a move. And that means the candidate, the family, if it's relocation, the kids, the spouse's job. Families with high school age kids don't move very often. So you should know that. You have to know it because you don't want to get down the line and have things not work out for something that was avoidable. And if they're moving somewhere, can they be happy there and afford it? Just getting there is fine. But if you want somebody to stick, all those boxes, have to be checked off. And when I'm dealing with a candidate, are they realistic with respect to salary expectations? Is the company in line with that? Can they afford what they're looking for? How do the benefits compare to deferred comp, et cetera, et cetera? That's kind of 101 stuff. But once it looks like you have a mutual fit, the candidate's looking for what the company has to offer. One of the questions I always like to ask, and my mentor when I was getting started in this business taught me this, and I use it to this day. I'll ask a candidate, what are you looking for that you don't have now? And then try to keep my mouth shut and listen. Because you'll usually hear what's motivating him. Sometimes he'll scratch their head, say, hey, good question, and really think about it. Because you want to get below the surface. You want to know what his drivers are, because you don't want to get down to the end of the process and not have it work out. So that's kind of the basics.
Okay. Over the years, what have you seen as the most successful interview processes for making a better hire?
Provided there's been some pre-screening, somebody like me or maybe an internal recruiter, just making sure some of those boxes are checked off. I mean, usually first it's a phone call. Maybe it's with HR, but they should give the person on the other end of the phone a good feeling for the culture of the company. Maybe review a couple of the key requirements, make sure you're in sync there. If there's anything you want to get into is on the resume, explanations, reasons, maybe a move, reasons for a job change. That's the time you want to get into it. But then you should tell them a little bit about the person it reports to. Give them a little background on that individual. They'll appreciate that. And I think you'll get on a more personal level if you get to that point. If the interview moves forward and you're going to see them in person, I see what works best. You want the person to interview with anybody that has an effect on them doing their job. So maybe it's a regional sales guy. He comes in, he talks to inside sales. That person speaks with the peers of the position, the support roles. So they know what kind of tools they have available to get their job done. So that I think that's really, really key. And there's nothing more important than being candid, straightforward, as honest as you can be. And if you're going to, some people ask questions, situational, which is great, and they'll say, hey, what do you need to work on? What do you need to get better at? Before you ask a question like that, tell them what the company's trying to get better at. Hey, these are some of the things we're trying to accomplish. I mean, that'll build a lot of credibility, and you want to get honest answers. And I find if you're transparent, honest, straightforward, that's the best shot you have at getting at it. Because on an interview, let's face it, everybody's on their best behavior. It doesn't get any better than that, and you just want somebody to speak from the heart.
When it comes to people looking for a job, is it usually about the money, or do most people want to move to another job for other reasons?
Most people that call me, money is usually not the first thing out of their mouth. Money is important, no doubt about it. And there are people who are strictly money motivated, but my experience, that's usually not the first thing. It's, maybe they don't think the company's doing the right things, going in the right direction. It's something with the boss, the peers, it's the environment. Not saying that the candidate's right and the company's wrong, but typically that's not usually the first motivator question I get.
Okay. In terms of key questions a company should ask once they zeroed in on a candidate that they want to make an offer to, what should they focus on to make sure they're getting the right person?
Yeah. So you've been through that process. He or she's had a chance to ask questions, field them back and forth. You're both in sync. You're getting to that point. I asked this question, but I think it's better if the company asks it, especially the boss. Whoever you're reporting to, you're in there, say, hey, listen, from what you know now, tell me what you think you need to be successful at this job. And again, listen after that. Because the person's got a ton of information. So they're going to tell you, what is important to them. So down the road, that's typically what happens. Geez, I wish I knew this. That wasn't as it was presented to me. You're getting a chance to tell them what you need. So I think that's a great question. And if you really want to take it to the next level, answer it. But then tell that individual, listen, I know when you go home, you're going to think about this. Something else will come up. Call me tomorrow and let's have another quick conversation. Don't email me, call me tomorrow. So it gives the person now another opportunity to say what they need to be successful. So I think that's, about as good as it gets.
In terms of placements, if a company's gone a couple of times with the same position, filling it over and over, what might that mean in terms of they're getting people and it's not working out?
It happens. I mean, I'm dealing with that now. Company had two operation people, plant managers basically, in a short period of time. And they talk about it wasn't a good fit, the culture, and I won't get into details. Now, maybe they did their due diligence, because one of the things I'm always looking for is the candidate telling you what he thinks you want to hear, or is he telling you what he thinks is the truth? So, it really comes down to interviewing. And I think reference checking could be key then. So let's say you're about to make an offer to a VP of sales, and this woman has come up through the ranks. There's some really key parts of it, or mentoring the people underneath her, and she says all the right things. So when you check references, your references should be tailored to that key point. I've been doing this 38 years. I've never had anybody give me a bad reference. Of course, they're going to give you somebody to say good things about you, but you got to ask the right questions. So if mentoring is key, and I was doing that woman's references, I would ask her, give me 2 people that you've mentored, and then just speak to them and see what they say. Oh yeah, great person. Well, why a great person? Well, she was more of my sponsor, not my mentor. She individually helped me with the things I needed help with, making sales calls. So again, it's reference checking. And I think specific reference checking towards those things. And if you really want to up it, the boss of that person should do at least 1 reference check. I always, I recommend it, so they hear it with their own ears.
Is the process any different for small, medium, large size companies in terms of, what the hierarchy may be at a smaller company versus a large company when you're going to try to place somebody? Is it vastly different experience, or basically is what you do the same?
No, it's different. I do a lot of work with small to medium sized companies, really by choice, because I find this, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, whatever. It just works for me. In a smaller company, there's fewer moving parts. Things get done more efficiently in my business. So there's not a lot of cursory interviewing, and there's a sense of immediacy, because they deal in a world where, small company, medium size, you wear a lot of hats, you got to get things done. It's their nature. So I think in a larger company, the process can take a little longer. I think it could be a little more diluted, but that's just my opinion, my findings.
Okay. The industry's in a period where there's I guess the industry always has change. When there's up cycles or down cycles or other pressures. In terms of a company, if a company is in an up mode or not so doing as well, how does that change things? Would you ever recommend a person go to a company that has an opening, but that they're having struggles?
Again, first of all, I don't recommend anybody do anything. I never recommend who they should hire. I mean, I'm a broker of information, put people together that have, like-minded needs and wants. So not everybody could be the A-team. That's actually a problem sometimes. A company will call me, and they use all the superlatives. They want this perfect person that parts water. That's maybe not what they need, and maybe they can't keep that person, even if they could hire them. You got to hire somebody that's going to be happy in that environment. Some people like turnarounds. Some people like to come into a situation that's not good. And once they interview, maybe they tell you, hey, there's some low-hanging fruit there. I could really make a mark for myself. So, everybody, there's a top for, every lid. What's that expression? I mean, it's the same thing. It doesn't mean if you're not doing well, you should hire less of a candidate. But, I have companies come and they tell me all the superlatives. Well, what do you want to pay this person? Well, that pay does not equal what you just told me. So I'm just telling you, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. And I tell people that if I think they're unrealistic. Companies can be unrealistic. Candidates can be unrealistic. I'm making X and I want this. Well, that's not realistic. So either you educate them or, you move on.
One of the things you've mentioned earlier, just talking to us, was about the importance of exit interviews and how you learn an awful lot from them, but most companies aren't able to do them. Maybe you can explain why that is and what you learn.
And there's nothing, people don't always get an honest exit interview, and it's not their fault. The person leaving he or she does not want to badmouth their company, even if they're 100% right. Because on the outside looking in, it never looks good, it never sounds good. So they'll tell them some things, but they may not tell them everything. And again, not that the person leaving is right, but they're not going to give them their honest, assessment most of the time. I find you get a more honest assessment if the culture of the company to begin with is very open, where people could speak their mind and have, criticism back and forth without getting personal. And then once a plan is made, we move on. But, when it comes to that exit interview, sometimes you get, name, rank, and serial number. Now, someone like me, when I hear it, I get the truth because they want to give me a good reason why they left. Or, hey, you made 3 moves in the last 10 years. Tell me what happened there. What precipitated each move. So if it's always, hey, my boss was an idiot, my boss was an idiot, my boss was an idiot, there's a pattern there. But they're going to tell me what they perceive to be the reasons. And maybe sometimes they're great. I mean, I've heard things about unethical type behavior. I've heard things about, companies said this, they were going to invest in that, and then they did not. Maybe something happened that they couldn't invest. But usually they're going to tell me what they perceive to be the truth, or someone like me, because they had nothing to lose with me.
Okay. Another factor, especially for younger employees, the whole thing of being a lifer is kind of an alien concept, but a lot of people in the industry have been in for decades. Now people, maybe they're there for a year or two, and they're going to move around. Do you find it, do companies expect to hire someone who's going to stay for a period to make it worthwhile for all the time and effort they put into grooming them?
They do. And it depends on the position. But certainly you hire someone, you want them to be there. I mean, who knows? 5 years, that's a pretty big horizon. But the reason things have changed, there are no more pensions. Pensions kept people in jobs. That was a big reason. People are much more mobile today. Kids get married later. They have children later. Buying the home isn't the end game. Some of them may never even own a home. So, a generation or two ago, people got married earlier, they had kids earlier, and that is, that keeps somebody in place. But you do want people that are going to, be there. So how do you do that? And I'm not just talking, 20-year-olds. What do you have to offer them? And I think, again, in the beginning, if there's, if you're going to be the plant manager and I'm the VP of manufacturing and I tell you, hey, listen, I have no plans of going anywhere for 15 years, at least you know that coming in. But if your aspirations are to go to something bigger, then you know that. But that's why I'm saying you got to do it up front. But people do move around more. Young people do. The industry doesn't have that many of them, but we've had this conversation before. Whenever I deal with a young person, and by young, I mean like, under 30, I tell them, stay in the industry because you have no competition. You'll leverage your career faster here and move up. But, that's like another whole conversation.
We got an interesting question, and one of the listeners wanted to know, how does a company make an employee loyal? How to make them want to stay?
I think it comes back to the culture. People want to be able to have their voice. They want to be heard. That doesn't mean you got to do everything they say, but there's got to be an atmosphere where you can be heard. That's a great thing. I ask like a senior executive if I'm working with them and I know it's important for this person to be a good listener and a mentor and flexible. I'll ask them, when was the last time you had a strong idea about something? You had a meeting about it. Somebody brought something up different and you changed your mind. So is it that kind of environment? But I mean, loyalty, people want to get up in the morning and be happy about going to work. So really, I know it's cliche, but people, they don't want to whistle on their way to work every day, but they don't want to dread it. So I think a lot of it has to do with atmosphere, and there's got to be a buy-in. Does a person think what you're doing as a company is correct? I've said this before. That's why ESOPs have no turnover or very low. There's a long-term incentive. You've got to think long-term, and you get over the bumps as an employee. Hey, what's the end game? I worked for 20 years. I'm going to have a windfall, which a lot of people will. Plus, when everybody's in, everybody owns the company, they work differently. So, you want to try to create that culture. Not everybody could be an ESOP, but you want to have that kind of culture and have people be happy coming to work.
When companies are looking for someone, do you think they start out with a wish list of everything they want for that person or position, and you're not going to find someone probably who chalks off every single element that would be in that list? What happens if a company is looking for the perfect employee and it can't find it?
Well, when I speak with someone and we're talking about the job, and I usually have a job description, and yeah, a lot of people have a laundry list. My job is to find out what they need absolutely, not their wish. The wish list is fine, and we try to check off some of those boxes. But if they say, hey, we need all 8 of these, and I think it's unrealistic, I'll tell them I can't help them. But part of my job is to figure out what I work on. And it has nothing to do with, how senior level of the job it is. I go back to that. Is the company ready, willing, and able to hire what they're looking for? So if you have all these things you need, but that's not realistic from the place you want to get them from, you want a wire and cable person, let's say, and that's why people call me. I really don't work in other industries. If I'm telling you, or if I know that that's, ridiculous, hey, we want a person, our relocation, well, what's your relocation? It's not good. And they're in a place where they have to relocate somebody, I'm going to have to tell them, we're not supposed to talk about age, this and that. But, yeah, we want somebody with earlier in their career, well, blah, blah, blah. So, they got to be realistic. And I gladly tell them I can't help them. Can't please everybody.
That leads into an interesting question, which you just brought up, the whole thing of hiring an older employee, because there is age discrimination. It's one of those things that it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but everyone knows it exists. What about the value of older employees? So let's say someone in their 50s who's got solid experience, it's settled in their life. Can you talk a little bit about people like that, how desirable they could or should be to an employer, and what your reality you're seeing?
First of all, 50s is not old. So, we did a piece on this, and I have this conversation a lot. Most of the industry right now running it, besides the big companies, you have a lot of people up there in age. So obviously I can't mention names. I had a company call me. I think 40% of their employees were age 60 and older. Their management staff was even more so. So, hey, listen, we're looking to hire this person that's going to be on the executive staff, a VP or whatever. We can't have somebody that's going to retire the same time we are. So is that age discrimination? I don't think it is, but I guess technically it is. You're taking someone's age into consideration, but I think there's a very good reason for it. On the flip side, I think people, you can't judge a book by its cover. I mean, I talk to people every day, that have been in the industry 35 years, have no desire or interest in retiring, have more giddy up than someone 20 years younger, and can speak to it. They can talk about accomplishments, not 30 years ago. Someone that's been in it for 30, 45 years, your resume should talk about things in the last 2 to 3 years. So what's the difference if I'm 63 and want to work till I'm 68 or 70, give you 5, 6, 7 years, you're probably not going to get more out of that from somebody you would consider a great hire before they move to something else. Older people have a lot of advantages. Their kids are grown. They probably have more time to work. They're not leaving for ball games. You know, they like work. So, you know, there's a lot to be, you know, be gotten from that. And they could be great mentors, sponsors, coaches of your younger people. People, when they get older, want to give. They don't have to hide it, you know, hold it in. Hey, I don't want nobody to take my place. They usually give more freely. At least I find that.
Have you found of people you've placed who are older, how has it worked out?
I mean, good. Again, it can't, I know people who are 40 that act like they're 80. I mean, but it's got to be, you know, we have very frank conversations. A lot of times people will call me and say, hey, Pete, I'm 64. I don't need to work. I want to work. I get calls. I won't say all the time, but I've gotten a number of calls. People who've retired, hey, I can't play golf every day. I'm going out of my mind. I want to get back to work. I don't need a title, blah, blah, blah. I just want to contribute. I know a person retired to Florida 2 years ago, just came back, and he's working for a New England company right now because he couldn't take, you know, that's what he wanted to do. It's probably a great, I didn't place him, but he's probably a great employee. He's got all this knowledge, energy, and will to do it.
We had another question come in. Someone wanted to know, how can you gauge if an employee is happy before he becomes unhappy and leaves, or she?
From a company perspective, well, that's then, you have your reviews, and do you have this culture of openness? Can people voice their opinions without worrying about retaliation or, you know, getting blackballed? So if your company has that, someone should tell you, you could nip it in the bud. Hey, listen, I got to tell you, it's me and maybe some others around me. This is happening, and I think it's making some people unhappy.
Okay. All right. And another question came in. As an engineer in my early 30s, how do I get into the manager, director of companies that have older employees?
I think the best, what I find, most people move into management, their first shot in management within their own company. Because it's less of a chance. You're a known entity, you're a known product. So even though you haven't managed, they know you real well and they think you can do it. You go to work for another company, it's a little bit of an unknown. They may think you can do it, but it's a little harder to do. But you have to find the right atmosphere. Maybe it is time to leave if you feel you're at that point. Those are the people I deal with. Maybe they're gainfully employed, but they say, hey, Pete, there's 2 places I can move here. Both of the people above me are going nowhere. So if you know of a management position, and it's going to be a little more difficult, and there's things that person could do to get themselves ready for management, but that may be the time to make a move. But did you know that coming in?
All right. Quick question in terms of finding candidates, how many people do you have in your Rolodex at any given time that you might be able to consider for a position that's opening up?
You know, I have kind of a proprietary, you know, CRM, if you will. You know, and we don't, you know, I might have 3,000 to 4,000 people, but it's not like you're considering all of them for every job. You know, we're looking for a plant manager in the Midwest that has a certain background. So that starts screening things down. I'm either calling people I think can do the job, or I'm calling people I believe can refer me to someone doing the job. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. You know, I know where the companies are. I know a lot of the people, so I can refine the process pretty quickly. I'm not saying it's easy. Hiring people is not easy. It's not an exact science. It just isn't. It's just because my specialization, I kind of, you know, live and die by it. I'm not starting from scratch when someone calls me looking for someone.
How long could it take either to fill a position or find a position for someone? I mean, could that be a year, a half year, or just?
Well, let's say, I mean, to fill a company, looking to fill a job, again, it's one of the things, you know, I try to evaluate when I'm speaking with them. You know, if it's a new job, hey, they've never had this person, that tends to go slower because they're conducting business without them. Someone left last week unexpectedly, there's going to be more of a sense of urgency. But usually in a couple of weeks, if I'm doing it, I'm presenting them with some candidates, and then hopefully the process is going to move, and I try to evaluate their process before I get started. You know, you talk to some people on the phone, you know, you can't wait 2 weeks to bring them in, 3 weeks to bring them in, or at least you have to know that going in. But again, one of the reasons I work with the companies I do, that tends to go faster. Now, an individual, unemployed, looking for a job, it's tough. It's tough because, I get those calls almost every other day. I always tell people, listen, I specialize in the industry, but for me to be doing something at a particular time that lines up with what you're looking to do in a certain geography, it's a little bit of fate, a little bit of luck. Now, someone calls me and I think they have some very marketable skills, I'll make calls for them. If I know they have something maybe with a client that would have an open ear to that, but that's not what I do day to day. And sometimes it's frustrating. And, during the last crash, I knew hundreds of people like that. And, your heart breaks. But, I do what I can. I try to help them.
Another person sent in a question. How can you tell if a potential employee would be productive, would be a really good producer?
Again, I go back to their references. So let's say the company's looking for something specific. Don't call up, say, hey, give me your last 3 bosses. Maybe the boss isn't the one to answer that question. Maybe you're talking about production. It's an inside sales person, which I don't do a lot of work in, but it would be very easy to speak with peers and maybe the direct boss there that can verify some things on your resume. Again, in the interview, everybody's on their best behavior. I always tell people that's as good as it gets. It only goes downhill from there, both the candidate and the company.
Okay. Another question came in. How can a company make sure that an exiting employee is keeping confidentiality, basically not bad-mouthing?
Well, a lot of people sign non-disclosures. You can't prevent somebody from going to work. You run into that all the time, non-competes. Some of them are, very generic and, not worth the paper they're written on, I found, when people contest it. But again, it comes from the culture there. People usually are not going to badmouth the company because, like I said, at the end of the day, most of the time, it will look bad from them. Sour apples, people don't want to hear it. They really don't.
Another question that came in, is inclusivity a fad or a legitimate trend that impacts the young people applying for a job?
No, it's certainly not a fad at all. I think the industry we work in, the wire and cable industry, lags behind a lot of things. Just manufacturing, it's not the highest tech, it's not the clean room environment, and it's just an older manufacturing industry. And I think it lags behind, but I think it was like lean manufacturing back in the day. I think, it was more popular a lot of other places before the cable industry. But I don't think it's a fad at all. I think it's because these people are going to be running the company in the not too distant future.
All right. In terms of another question that came in, relocation plans. You had mentioned earlier, one of the problems, where are factories located and where people want to be. What can you discuss, maybe your thoughts on relocation? You
mean relocation, what the company has to do? All right, well, let's say expectations of the candidate. I should know that. If they own a home and they're upside down on their mortgage, it's not going to be easy for them to relocate, even if they say it is. So that's someone like me or someone doing their job, just so you don't get to the end and it's, it falls through the cracks. Company-wise, when somebody says, we'll relocate somebody, I ask them, well, what will you do? Well, we'll do what we have to do. Will you pay the realtor's fees? Oh, well, I didn't say that. Well, I'm asking you, will you pay the realtor fees? Packing and shipping and goods, temporary living. So, a relocation package that's very inclusive could cost, $60,000, $70,000. Most of the companies I deal with aren't going to spend that. Well, we'll do it according to the candidate. You got to qualify that because you sometimes end up wasting your time. So I'm always trying to know what I have to work with. But if you're relocating somebody, you're going to have to expect to spend some money. Again, well, we want to hire a younger person. Well, that doesn't make it easier because if you want somebody in the industry, that list isn't that big. Where if if it was another industry, hire somebody from anywhere, it's easier to hire a local person. But people try to avoid it.
You've been in this field for a long time. Has it changed really in any way, what you do?
What I do?
Yeah.
Not really. Like I said, I'm in the information business. I'm a broker of information. When I'm speaking with people who have known me or know of me, I'm trying to give them what I believe to be the truth. I'm not saying I'm always right, but I'm giving them what I think is true and, maybe a couple of decades of information. Sometimes the person they're reporting to, I placed in the company, and I could tell them, give them a little background on that individual. And, interview preparation, that's like a whole other webinar, but that's one of the things I really can help out with, because I could usually tell people who they're interviewing with and a good amount about them. Not that I'm giving them the one-up, but I always tell them the interviewing process stinks. You're going to spend however much time across the desk. It's not easy. You've got to do the right things. And knowing who you're speaking with is probably more important than doing your homework, which is one-on-one stuff on the company you're interviewing with. And you could get some information now, social media, LinkedIn, on the person you're interviewing with. But sometimes I tell people things that really help them out in the interview. I just had one of these. I said, listen, you're going to talk to this person. It was a woman interviewing with a guy. I said, listen, you're going to interview with him. He's a poker face. But don't take that as he's not interested. You're not going to get a smile out of him, nothing. You're not going to know if he hates you or loves you. And it happened to be, he really liked her, but she said, hey, I'm really glad I knew that, because I'm trying to read body language, facial expression, and the guy was blank. Like I said, he was a poker face. That was great information. It wasn't, was it valuable? Yeah, because maybe she would have interviewed a little differently, thinking, hey, I'm not saying the right things here, where she was.
When it comes to actually a company choosing someone, is this usually a single person in a company, or basically the consensus of 3 or 4 people interviewing? The whole thing, like who is it the one person? Is there one person usually ultimately making the decision? And does it help to know who that person is?
It's usually the person that it reports into. And what I found, unless there's something glaring, they're going to go with what they think. Because first of all, let's say you interview with 6, 7 people. They're not all going to love you equally. There may be some people that don't, but that's that person's job. Maybe my production control manager, who I had this plant manager interview with, who would be one of his reports, told me something, but I got to weigh that. But you got to take a consensus from the people around you, and then somebody's got to make the decision, and it should be, and usually is, the person it reports to. But it's not like everybody's got to check off every box and every candidate. You'd never hire anybody.
In terms of the perks that come with a job, are the people looking for jobs, are they having certain expectations that maybe have changed, like flex time, or is it that basically for these positions, this is grinded out positions that you're going to be expected to pay your dues?
Yeah, flex time I don't get into. What I will tell you that's popular in transitioning at the very executive level, people not relocating. You get people that, this big mergers that have been happening in our industry. Some of these people, very senior level jobs, they want to be a GM or a president of another company or a very senior role, but they're not moving. Listen, I'll be there. Everybody's got to travel anyway. I'll be there 3-4 days a week, but I'm not moving. And that's kind of a thing now. Bigger companies, they'll give into that. Smaller companies, not so much. But, I don't deal with people as much. It'll come to me and say, not that I don't deal with them, I don't hear it. How are they on flex time? It's usually all hands on deck. The wire and cable industry, a lot of it's lower margin, unless you're a niche company, which there are, that are material centric, process centric, but they don't have that luxury. They're not serving sushi in the company cafeteria, daycare center there. Maybe some really big companies do, but it just, I don't see it.
When people are displaced, because there's certainly been more than enough news, and often you don't even hear the news of staff being cut. The people who lost their jobs, is that like a non-factor in terms of they're seeking a job because everyone understands it just happens? Or is it that they were one who was displaced and let go and it makes it a little bit harder?
Yeah, being unemployed, there's no stigma like there used to be a generation ago. Hey, if he or she was so good, why'd they let him go? Because everybody you talk to has either been in the same situation or knows somebody really well that has. Now, if you've had 5 jobs in 5 years, yeah. But, you know, I'm dealing with somebody now. He was with his company 12 or 13 years, and he's unemployed. And I told him that has absolutely no bearing. Well, you know, will I be able to negotiate? Well, I say maybe some fine points, but as far as how people look at you, your worth, your value, being unemployed right now, it's no big deal. And it's not nowadays because it's more commonplace.
Oh, I got another question. Hang on. All right. How often should upper management talk to their employees, or should there be a fear of turnover due to not talking to them?
Now, I think the most visible senior levels, I was telling you before, I dealt with this small company. The guy's retired now, I could say it. Data guy by the name of Don Irving, great guy. I walked through his factory with him years ago before he sold the company. You know, small company, $20 million, I guess. Knew everybody knew him. And I think he told me no one's ever left the company unless they've retired or were deceased. So talk about, you know, a guy that was visible. Everybody felt like they were heard. They felt like he had their best interest in mind. And it wasn't an ESOP. It was just a good place to work that everybody felt, you know, good about going to work in the morning. So I think you should walk the line, talk to the operators. If you're the VP of manufacturing, come in on the off shift. You know?
Okay. Oh, we have another question. Would you hire someone with typos on the resume?
I see it. You know, I tell them it's not so much the typo, you know, and I always tell people, I look at resumes all the time, and, you know, I tell them you got to fix that stuff and have somebody, you know, you just can't do spell check. Let somebody else look at it. I mean, somebody told me I had a typo on my website. I didn't know, you know, I never saw it, but it can't be commonplace. It happens, but I don't know. It's a mistake. Oh, it's the attention to detail. Yeah, some of that is true. I mean, it just depends.
You mentioned, speaking on another day, you had mentioned that some people looking for jobs, they're not the kind of people who are going to reply to anything that's posted online. Can you talk a little bit about how some people are interested, but only if it's a right fit, and they're not interested in most positions it might open up?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are the kind of people I talk to a lot of the times, you know, where they're on the market for a specific job or a specific geography, and otherwise they're happily doing their job. So, you know, I have to know exactly what they're looking for, and I may talk to them. There's people I've spoken with for 30 years. I've never placed them, and I've never placed anybody with them, but they've referred me people, whatever. And there's people I've put in positions after knowing them for 25 years for the first time. It's so, like I said, the 3 categories of candidates: the unhappy, you know, the unemployed, the gainfully employed that are looking for something certain. The guy that wants to be president, that's the VP. So you got to know what their hot button is.
Now, another question: is English not a first language a problem, or as long as they're understandable, it's fine?
No, not at all. I mean, most factories are a melting pot anyway. I mean, if you speak another language, you're in the factory, it's usually a big plus. But no, I mean, if you're in a customer-facing position, obviously, you know, you want to be able to be understood. And I deal with people all the time, and I know they're better, you know, a thick accent, and I always tell them, don't be like me. When you're on the phone, speak slowly. In person, it's a little easier. On the phone, you have a thick accent, it's a little harder. But no, it's not an issue.
Another question, it's interesting because it's about resumes, and they want to know whether a resume should be a single page. But then the whole question is, in this industry, do people really look closely at a resume? They just want to know, where were you? What's your thoughts?
No, I mean, 2 pages is fine. Don't try to keep it to 1 page. A resume is a business document. It only has one purpose. It's to make the person reading it pick up the phone and call you. Now, your resume with a tailored, cover letter, if you're dealing with me, I'm going to be presenting it so it doesn't have to be as good, let's say. But a resume should be bullet form, accomplishment-oriented, detailed. If you reduce scrap from 7.6 to 3.1, don't say 8 to 3%. Specific numbers, they're more believable. It sounds like you could put your finger on it. If you increase sales from X to Y, specific numbers. Brought in 8 new OEM customers, in 14 months. So you want to be specific, accomplishment-oriented. Everybody knows generically what a regional sales manager does. So short job description. And then what'd you do? What did the place look like when I got here? What's it look like now? What effect did I have on that change?
If someone's looking for a position and they have a LinkedIn file, how good is that?
How good is
just having
valuable?
Yes, I mean, without having more. I mean, if someone's starting out, everyone has a LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I know people look at them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things people don't talk about, and it's a big thing with LinkedIn, you could be one of those passive candidates, but kind of put it out there by having a very detailed LinkedIn profile without advertising that you're looking for a job. So that's what a lot of people look at it. Is there enough on there for me to contact that person? Could they potentially fit? So if somebody's got a real detailed LinkedIn profile and they're gainfully employed, it probably tells you something. They probably will have an open ear to something.
How often are you surprised by what happens?
All the time. I really am. Things happen in the industry. People ask me what my opinion is. The economy. I know nothing. I mean, really, I've seen crazy things. It's good for me when some companies are doing well, some are doing bad. It's not good for me when everybody's off the charts good or it's 2009. It's when it's in the middle. But, like I said, I certainly don't have a crystal ball.
We're going to ask if anyone has a question to get it in now. Otherwise, I'm going to just ask Peter if he could just speak a little bit about what you would tell a company president about. You're looking to hire someone. Focus in on this. Just here's one or two things that you really should focus on so that you know exactly how the process should go.
Again, it depends what they need. What are their absolutes? That's what you want to find out. What are the absolutes? We can't go forward unless we have this. So, you might have all those other boxes checked off your wish list, but you really want to focus in on that. And then your search has to be geared towards that. And that's where you're going to have to look for that passive candidate if you want the big field.
All right, one more question here coming in. How critical is good communication skill on higher management level, and how can a person develop it?
I mean, once you get to a certain point, it's almost everything. People have to want to work with you in the beginning, and then they have to want to work for you as you move into management. So you got to develop that. You just don't have it one day. So I think being a good communicator, engaging people, being an active listener, when you're speaking to someone, they should think, you're their whole world. Can you do that? And I've seen executives just routinely take out some of their people, kind of business aside, and just talk to them as people. And I think because people, you need empathy. People, like I said, they have to feel like they can come to you. Not that you're going to agree with them all the time, but you want people to be, you to be approachable.
All right, and one other area, and that's young employees or trying to find, say, an engineer out of college. That could be challenging and frustrating, first trying to get someone, and second, trying to keep them for more than a year or two. But is there a way a company might make that process simpler?
What I've seen, I don't know about simple, what I've seen work more, a lot of cable plants are in more remote locations. So you don't need a BSEE from MIT. You don't in the wire and cable industry. But hey, we need a technically degreed person, or we want a technically degreed person. How about an associate's with a technical degree that you develop? Would that work? And if it is, maybe someone local. So, you have a cable company that's kind of, in a remote location. You find someone that was born and bred there, that went to a local school. They're more likely to stay in that area, or maybe that's their preference. And then as far as the company, what could you give them that they're not getting elsewhere? Maybe there's more, like I said, I think mentoring, coaching, young employees will go a long way because they may not get that anywhere else. Help them develop some of the things they're not going to get in school, or maybe, they go to work or try to go to work for a tech company, more competition. Just think about it. How many more people work in tech today as 10, 15, 20 years ago? So you're competing with that, but not everybody can work for, Google or Facebook.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Peter Carino, and I would like to note first our next seminar, webinar will be Wednesday, March 25th on chemical baths, Chemitol BASF, and that's at 11 a.m. But we greatly appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike.